My name's Dave DeBow, founder of MoneyPartnerFormula.com, and this show is built for everyday real estate investors who are actively doing deals and looking to scale using other people's money. So if you're an active real estate investor and you want to get featured on this show to talk about your own real estate and capital raising experiences, then just go to daveinterviewsyou.com. Now let's get rolling with this episode, and remember to subscribe for daily interview content.
All right, guys, welcome back to Property Profits Podcast. I'm your host, Bryce Kaminsky, filling in for Dave DeBow. And have you ever wondered what it takes to truly build a relationship on the acquisition side to make sure that it's not only a win-win for you and the seller, to make sure that when you're looking at deals that you're not just in it for yourself, and what that can do for your business overall? Today on the show, I have Jeff Stevens. He's from the Portland Bend area, and he's going to tell us a little bit more about how he approaches real estate, not only with the BRRRR and the occasional flips, but how he's able to build relationships to really grow his business. Jeff, welcome to the show. Great to have you here, man.
Yeah, I sure appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, no problem. So let's talk about the origin story, like the Marvel to DC. How did you get into real estate? What was your first, introduction to the idea?
Yeah, not too long after my wife and I bought our first primary residence, that was maybe 2002, if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm.
I, came across a couple books here or there. The old Rich Dad, Poor Dad was the first thing I read that kind of got me thinking, that's interesting. And I went down that rabbit hole a bit. And then a couple years later, we bought our first rental property. That was a triplex about a mile from where we lived. And we just took out some equity from the primary residence we had bought that was doing well at that time. And this first deal was a very conventional deal, very, very different than sort of how I do things today.
Mm-hmm.
But it got us in the game. And from there, we kind of slowly bought a couple more. We had another business. And so we'd make some money. We'd pay down the home equity loan, our line of credit, I guess it was. We'd borrow again to buy something else. And so we did that for a little while and got to maybe about 6 doors or so. And then when I started to get tired of my other business, I was just ready for some kind of a change. It didn't take too long for me to realize real estate was a pretty easy answer for me to decide what was next. And so I made that transition back in about 2013, and I've been going full time ever since then.
Yeah, it almost seems like real estate is the business, and then there's all these like other businesses that exist, service-based businesses. But for some reason, like real estate doesn't, for me, come off as like a service-based business. Even as a real estate agent doing that business, you're still trading what seems to be like a commodity, the
Yeah.
house. And so you can have all these other businesses, but they never really have the commodity basis to them, unless maybe you're trading oil or digging oil out of the ground, because this is what people need, is housing, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
how many rentals was it? I guess the real question is, people want to get out of their jobs to some degree, or transition to something that makes them happier, or fits into their life by design. Did you have the business and another job, or was the business just, you decided, I just want to do the real estate thing? Like, what did it look like for your day-to-day income generation?
Yeah. Originally, I've been self-employed for over 20 years, I think 21, 22 years now. And so our first business was a branding and marketing consultancy. We worked with financial institutions.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were purely self-employed, which we were able to get a couple bank loans as a result of that, but there was certainly a limit to that. And
Yeah.
that also kind of plays into the direction I ultimately would kind of go as a real estate entrepreneur. But, I use that word real estate entrepreneur very intentionally. I think of investors and entrepreneurs as not being two synonymous words, interchangeable words. I see them as being slightly distinct from each other. And I identify personally a lot more as a real estate entrepreneur than a real estate investor.
Okay, so define them for us. What would you say is the difference, the biggest difference?
Yeah. So I think it's kind of about one's mentality and how they then go about things. So for instance, an investor tends to, in my opinion and experience, get together some resources, look for investments, and then place those resources into investments.
Mm-hmm.
The way that I define an entrepreneur, though, is somebody who goes out and seeks opportunity, usually creates opportunity more than finds it, but they seek opportunity. Then they gather the resources needed to place into that opportunity to capitalize on the opportunity there. So if it's about sequence, investors tend to think, I have money, let me go find a deal, and now I will, I'll
And
close
that's
on that
kind of what
deal.
it looks like, right? Like I'm investing into a property, and they might not even be the people like doing the construction or the renovation or anything. They might be a fund buying and clear across the country, and that's an investment. But what you're saying is the entrepreneur is the catalyst of the deal making that's going on, and then you're creating that investment that ultimately the money comes along to play that role.
Yeah,
So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, and I mean that's a big thing too, is that the entrepreneur is out there. I always say that there's no limit, and this is what my venture capitalist buddy said. He said there's no limit to capital in this world, but there certainly is a limit to the number of ideas being presented. So
Hmm.
have more ideas, the capital is there to invest. So
Yeah.
your main idea is BRRRR in Portland. When did it go full time? So tell me about your first full time year.
Yeah, the first year full time for me, I did a flip or two, kind of stumbled through that.
Mm-hmm.
I had not done it before. Went all right. The Portland area has been a high demand area for quite a while,
Yeah.
so it went okay. But for me, the first year was about, I would say, cultivating my approach. So I think a lot about my approach. I talk a lot about my approach. A lot of the content I create is more about approach than it is about sticks and bricks for the most part.
So let's
And
do that. To bring us, because that's what I'm really most excited about. Bring us
yeah,
to your
yeah,
approach to investing, this relationship building that you're talking about.
yeah, absolutely. So I had this experience where my first couple deals were very conventional, like I mentioned, and I thought, okay, this feels okay, but I could see how this would be really painfully slow. And I'm sort of at the whim of banks and realtors and whatnot to give me permission to buy the next thing, maybe.
Mm.
And then on the other hand, I had, become exposed to all these ideas that were more creative,
Mm-hmm.
wholesaling perhaps, and various things like that. And as I did those things, I thought to myself, I can see how that might work, but it doesn't feel like me. So to paraphrase, like the conventional way felt okay to my heart. I didn't feel dirty or gross doing that conventional way, but my brain said, I don't know, it's got to be a better way. In the other case, the more sort of creative stuff, maybe like wholesaling, for instance, my brain said, I see how this could work, but my heart said, this is not who I am. And so this period for me was ultimately, I talk about this a lot now. I think we all, in order to really gain a lot of traction in our real estate endeavors, we
Mm-hmm.
have to land on a strategy and approach that is at the intersection of our head and our heart. So I like to think of it like that. Because
Mm-hmm.
if we're trying something that only makes sense up here but not down here, then we're going to be fighting our nature all the time, and we're going to feel bad and gross, and it's not going to feel authentic.
Well, and you're probably not going to be consistent with it too, which is one of the
Yep,
big
exactly.
parts of the business.
Exactly. Or you could be trying something that feels really good, but it's not really working, and you're not going to get a long ways that way either. And so this isn't something we talk about a lot in our industry, but I think that we all need to be sort of on the hunt for that thing that is at the intersection of the head and the heart, because that's when we know it works, it makes sense to us, but it's also genuine and authentic to us. And I think that when those two things happen, that's when we can really start making some progress.
Yeah, because sometimes you can be in real estate and being like I've been wholesaling for a decade or close to a decade. And there are days where I'm like, another house on another hill with another group of first time flippers walking through, challenging me on everything. And they're just fresh out of the latest Rich Dad, Poor Dad seminar or whatever. And they're telling me about what it is. And I'm just like, eh, it's, it's not like super exciting, or like my heart's not super in it. But then I do realize I always have to temper it and say, like, in that group of 10 people is someone who's really here to change what it is. Because I talk about this a lot, so I'll throw it to you. I say, what's your unfair advantage in this business? What comes easy to you that other people find difficult to do?
Yeah. You're really getting at the heart of what I do and what I love to share with people and opportunities like this. So what I've come to know for me is that the living room of a seller, where I can sit in the living room with them, no agents, nobody else, that's where I shine, because for whatever reason, they tend to feel comfortable with me. I
Mm,
ask the kinds of questions that give me insights as to what's really going on in their life, how this property fits into that bigger picture. They feel comfortable enough opening up, and we develop excellent rapport kind of through this approach. I always tell people, I believe we have to solve the person before we can solve the deal.
mm-hmm,
In
mm-hmm,
our industry, our normal education, it sort of teaches us to just jump right in and start thinking about numbers and whatnot. And I think we could be thinking about numbers in the back of our mind, but we're never going to know what the best possible deal is, what all the possibilities and opportunities are, unless we crack the code on the person and we truly understand what's
mm-hmm,
going on with them. And so I talk a lot about relationship, which sometimes I feel self-conscious about that, because maybe it's a cliche word, and maybe people think, oh, you just show up and be a real estate investor, but smile more and maybe hug people. But that's not at all what I mean. I actually really mean focusing much more on the person, not even as a solution provider. I think that's another sort of cliche in our industry, but
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
showing up and just truly trying to ask the questions that understand what is happening that has even created the opportunity for me to sit in your living room and have a conversation with you about this. What are all the different considerations that this person has? What are their attitudes about everything? Do they think the market's up? Do they think the market's down? Do they think the market's flat? Do they think they have the most beautiful property in the whole country? Do they think it's a pile of crap? What do they think? What do they think of the political environment? What do they think of what's happening in the local economy? I'm there to be a detective and to gather insights on their opinions. I need to understand their worldview. And
mm-hmm.
until I can do that, I never really know for sure what the best deal is. And so that's a lot of my approach. It's about uh, putting myself in a position to connect with people where there's no intermediaries, there's no agents, there's no FISBO sign out front. Nobody else knows that they're even a seller. It's just me talking to them in a comfortable way. When they contact me back from my marketing, they feel like it's a very safe conversation. They feel like I'm a peer, not a salesperson. And we
Mm-hmm.
just have a real kind of human conversation that I think allows us to crack open different ideas and outcomes than most people can.
Yeah, because there's a tendency to be terse um with the person selling it. Like you might not even you might I think that comes from experience though. Like the people who start and they're out there and they're doing the thing and they get a call and they're all jacked up and they're like, I'm going to negotiate this person into the ground and I'm going to go in there and I'm going to get this house for whatever pennies on the dollar that the local that the coaching program that they have is telling them to buy it at. Um, I don't mind those people being in the market because it makes more space for guys like us. Uh, but I think that you only get, and what do you think? Can you be that way right away, or does it take seeing these situations? Because that's what really impacted me the most is sitting in those living rooms where you're like, this person's life has been like this for 20 years, and I can't be in here for 5 minutes, but they live here. And like, how did it get there? And like, what's going on and
Mhm.
what, like, are you okay with this? Are you
Yeah.
okay with what's going on here? Because I don't think, I feel like, and maybe what do you think, is that you kind of have to see that to know that, to understand that. So how do you teach a brand new person how to be empathetic to that situation?
Yeah. I think the first thing is we have to step back and recognize all the assumptions that we are almost certainly making. And I'll say, for context too, what I do and what I teach my coaching clients is very, very much oriented towards buying properties from absentee owners. So we're not usually walking into a hoarder's house that they're,
Mhm.
about to go into foreclosure. We're usually buying properties, honestly, from what would look to on the surface to most real estate investors like are traditionally trained as unmotivated sellers. This is somebody who's had a
Mhm.
fourplex for 30 years and they're doing great. It's paid off. They play golf all the time. It's they're not in a bad spot at all.
Mm.
And so we can go in with a lot of assumptions. I think step one to empathy is to realize all the assumptions that we walk into the conversation with. I assume they always want the most money possible. Sounds like a reasonable assumption. Not always true.
No.
I assume that they think this about their property because that's what I'm seeing when I look at their property, right?
No.
I assume they care a lot about capital gains tax. I assume they care a lot about their what happens with their tenants. And I've met lots of sellers that care about those things and lots that don't. So to your point, I do think that there is there's a lot to be said for the reps that as we talk to more and more and more people and sit down with them, we start to see they're all extremely different from each other. They're
Mhm.
very different from me as well. And it becomes a little bit easier to realize that this conversation could go anywhere. They could say the most surprising thing that I can't even possibly imagine. But so to just to be very, very open to that and to listen for clues. I think that's the second thing is in my business, I'm really trying to buy properties with seller financing or you
Mhm.
may call it vendor take back, but this sort of idea where I buy it, I become the owner, I'm on title, there's no other debt that's staying in their name or anything like that. If there's any debt at all, which often there isn't, but it's getting taken
Mhm.
out, I'm the owner, and now they have a deed of trust, as we would call it here, recorded with the county where the property is, and they're just the bank, they're just the lender, they're the beneficiary of a promissory note. And so what we have to do is become really, really good at listening for the clues that sellers will give us because they will say these things all the time if we know what to listen for.
Mhm.
That allows us to know that seller financing could be a really good solution for them. So what when I coach people, I see happening all the time. That kind of goes wrong for them, is is that they show up really excited to buy a property with seller financing, and they make it obvious they really want to buy a property with seller financing,
Mhm.
rather than facilitating this conversation in a way such that the conversation comes to them, they hear the clues, and now they can responsively give a proposal back about seller financing that utilizes what the seller told us that they wanted. So it doesn't look now at all like seller financing is our idea.
Mhm.
It feels to them like it's this perfect prescription based on the diagnosis that we established together in the conversation.
Yeah, it's usually a composition of why are you selling this thing and what are you going to do with the money? And if they're like, it's kind of, I'm done being a manager and, I do still like getting paid every month. And then you're like, well, let's see what we can do here. How about a vendor take back where carry you're going to give me a mortgage and we're going to deal with that and I'm going to keep paying you and I'm going to take over the property. I'm going to put a different note on it. And so the other thing that can be tricky for people who are really excited about that is they kind of try to make everything seller financing, even if it's just a
Yeah.
clear cut deal. The guy's like, I want nothing to do with owning this thing. I just want my money. And they're like, have you thought about vendor for financing? It's just
Mhm.
like, he didn't say that. He says he wants to sell it and go to Mexico. Like, let the guy go. So just buy it and move on to the next thing. You can't vendor finance everything. So,
Yeah.
on the capital side of things, on the things you don't vendor finance, I'm assuming you're using other people's money. I mean, the BRRRR method has a limited framework. You can kind of recycle a few partners. But what does the future look like for your business as far as scaling it up? Are you going to go to multifamily? Like, what does the future look like for your real estate now that you're closing in on a decade?
Yeah, I find myself um appreciating what I would say is a healthy tension between the idea of mastering one thing and
Mhm.
learning and growing growing and learning other new things. I think a lot of us, maybe most of us, even in this in this real estate space, like we like to learn stuff. There's no doubt
Mhm.
about that.
Mhm.
And but I also want to be very, very aware of shiny object syndrome and sort of changing what I'm doing just for the sake of changing what I'm doing. So I feel a lot of like the healthy tension actually between those different ideas. So the one thing I will tell you I'm not planning to change is my overall approach where I meet directly with sellers. I have a real conversation with real people. I don't feel like I ever submit offers. I present proposals. So these are thoughtful things that I've created myself that I could present in person with somebody, not through agents. None of that's really ever going to change for me because that
Mhm. It's
is
a
the
core part of
DNA.
your business. Yeah.
Yeah, it is the DNA. But I do want to begin spending more of my energy working on some bigger things, some more expandable, scalable types of things, like some smaller commercial properties, whether it could be industrial or we have a couple small commercial properties now, but I think things like you know, storage units, and RV parks, things a little bit, you know, the income approach to value applies more to them, where my skill set could apply just as well to talking to those sellers, but in opportunities with perhaps more upside.
Hmm. Yeah, the RV park thing is really starting to catch some. I think it's because people are moving off of multi as the price isn't really lining up with the like weight of the carry. You're like, oh yeah, but if it was a few more percent more in the cap rate, maybe I would do it. But look at this RV park. Look at the cap rate over here, and I don't even own the units. Like the I just have maintenance dirt, you know. So there's this, but then again, that's only in the last couple of years in the shiny object syndrome. You know, I've seen a lot of guys and girls, in the breakdown of people who established a business and then got caught in shiny object and like died on that hill and it collapsed their original business. So as
Yeah,
long as we don't get too far away, but I like what you said. You said my business isn't BRRRRs, it's the way I acquire, and that will
yeah,
transfer into whatever future I decide to take it into. It's very cool.
yeah. Thank you.
So, um, when we're talking about that that sort of relationship building, trust building that you do, you're talking to absentee owners, so that's a strategy that probably some prop stream or something like that. But when you get into the person's presence,
Mhm.
what are, instead of the good stuff, what about let's give the people at home things not to say when having an investor sit down with the seller of a property. So with your approach, what are some things you just would advise your clients not to say ever
Yeah,
or don't?
yeah, it's a good question, and it's kind of it's a fun question too. And I'll just let me just give you the disclaimer.
It's all
I don't
experiential.
practice the same thing as everybody else in the real estate world.
Mm,
So my answer, they might sound bizarre, but first and foremost, both in our marketing, and if you want, we can talk about the marketing a little bit too, but
we got a
in our
few minutes, yeah.
marketing, I am very, very careful to never use the word investor. To me, the word investor comes across as I'm here to make money at your expense. And that's not that's not the
Yeah.
impression that I want to give people. So when I talk talk to my coaching clients about how we're marketing, how we're positioning ourselves, I do this sort of thing with my hands where it's like we're trying to make sure that the seller feels like we're on equal footing from like a power dynamic perspective. And so to me, the word that defines this really well is peer. I want them to feel like, they're a mom and pop landlord. I'm a mom and pop landlord. I'm just reaching out to inquire about having a conversation. If they were to call me back, that this feels very safe.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of normal sort of real estate investor marketing sort of is like, hey, I'm this hungry lion, and it looks like you're a wounded gazelle.
Yeah.
And
I
here, give me a
noticed your
call so that I can
properties
pounce on you.
junk.
Yeah,
I'm coming for you.
yeah. I smell blood in the water, whatever cliche we
Yeah.
want to use.
Yeah.
So
I get
I
that.
don't position anything as investor. I position it as I'm a regular person like you are. And so when we show up in the living room, it's really important that we express that experientially as well, because the words in the letter have conveyed that, the phone call have conveyed that. But what do regular people not tend to really do? Like regular people like don't have business cards. Like I'm not carrying business cards so I can give them
Yeah.
to
No
like
business
a
card.
mailman who I see and the person at the grocery
Yeah.
store. Like I don't even do business cards anymore because it feels too businessy.
I'll
Uh,
usually like rip off a piece of paper and write some stuff on it and be like, here's the
yeah,
back of this piece of paper.
yeah. I also am a big believer in and a teacher of not talking about I'm here to pay cash. I'm going to close quickly and I'll cover your closing costs and we'll buy it as is and all those things because in every one of those words is embedded an assumption.
Hmm.
And sometimes a seller, if you were to even to say to them, oh yeah, we buy all cash or whatever, and pay your
They're
closing
like,
costs.
what does that mean? They don't
Yeah,
even
well,
like
yeah,
that's the thing about that marketing that really gets me is like not once has anyone asked me to pay their lawyer fees. Not once after all that
mhm,
marketing did any of the people that I bought houses from care about any of those things other than the stuff we talked about in person. Like, when do you want to move? And like, how much time do you need? And do you need a few bucks to move? And the groceries look low. Like that's, I think, better marketing. Like I'm always like I keep a swipe file in town, so everything that comes through, we always keep everyone's marketing so we can look at it. And when we were doing a marketing review the other day, I was like, all of these letters are talking about what they want, and they have very little to do with what the
mhm,
customer. Like, imagine the pizza thing was just all about like how much pizza they could like sell you. It's like,
mhm,
no, that's no, the pizza flyer is about how much pizza we can give you, and the
yeah,
price is right there. But man, the price is bigger than the pizza. Like, I don't get the marketing approach. So you
yeah,
show up and it's all like on the same level. You want to be just
mhm,
like them, which is one of
yeah,
the main like negotiations, be just like them.
yeah.
What
Mhm.
else?
Yeah. So I'm trying to make sure that I'm demonstrating who I am. Like a lot of our moms taught us, we actions speak louder than words, right? So I'm trying to
Hmm.
show them who I am as much as I am trying to tell them who I am. So
Hmm.
I like thoughtful little tiny things like offering to asking if I should take my shoes off when I come in, for instance.
Hmm. Hmm.
I could have a brochure that says, "Hey, I'm a nice, considerate guy," or I could just ask to take my shoes off, and they could understand that that's how it is. I think the other
You
thing is I really try to not have any. It's not that I don't have structure to the conversation, but I do not try to convey that I have a clipboard with like a questionnaire on it. I try to not
Yeah.
even take notes, honestly, unless they're just throwing a lot of really specific things at me. I might say, you know what, I'm gonna take some notes here. I'm just taking insanely good mental notes that I can then transfer to paper later because I want this to feel like a real conversation with a real person. And so
Hmm.
I like to let the not it's not so much let the conversation go where it will. I mean, that's there's a part of that too, but I don't want this to feel like an interview that I've done 1,000 times. I want this to feel like this is the first conversation you ever had with me. It's the first conversation I've had with you. And it's going to be much more organic, right? So I'm much more likely to start with a question of like, okay, I'm so glad for the opportunity to come over here. We spoke for a few minutes on the phone, but tell me like what's going on? And just start with like a really open-ended kind of question. Um, love to take what we call off ramps whenever there's an opportunity to talk about something besides the property. I will do that. We almost play a game that's like, how long can I avoid talking about the stupid property when I
Hmm.
show up at their house? And this is one
It's
of the
like,
main reasons.
you've ever seen that episode of The Office where Michael's closing the guy at Chili's? And every time they start
No.
talking about business, Michael's like, "Oh, we should get an onion blossom and tell a joke." And he's like, he understands when it's time to talk about the property. And the other closer, so his boss in that episode, she's just trying to get to the paperwork and talk about it and talk about it. You can see the guy's face, he's like not
Yeah.
interested. So when it was time, then it was time instead of
Yeah.
making it time to talk about the
Yeah.
property. Like, we're going to talk about what it's worth and all that when it's time. So I like that, taking the off ramp. Very cool.
Yeah. And this really speaks to the importance of doing this in person is, I mean, not only is rapport built a million times better in person, but
Mhm.
there's a million times more clues in their house than
Yeah.
there is over the phone, than there is via email, that surely that there is via text.
Hmm.
Um, And a lot of times, when I first talk to a seller, especially when the property that I have sent them a letter about is a rental property, their question is like, "Great, so you want to meet at the property?" And if I can, I'd really rather not meet them at the property. I'd rather meet them at their house because there's a lot more clues as to who I'm dealing with at their house than at the property, right?
If you're listening at home, I've done a few interviews and I've never heard that before. I
Yeah, I
think
mean,
it
I
has
think
to
we
do
should.
with I think it has to do with your absentee owner approach too, that it's falling
Mhm.
into the model. Because that's interesting. Like, yeah, we can meet at the property, and ultimately, if I'm gonna buy it, we're gonna go look at it. Um, but you could do just about the same meeting on a non-owner occupied property at their house, and
Mhm.
you could find out what their financial position is, like how it feels in their house. Or you meet them at a trailer park and it's just like the guy's got no power and the water's leaking through the roof? Or are you meeting a guy in the nice part of town in 3 or 4 car driveway with a 4 car garage and you're like, okay, that's different right away. You can
Mhm.
know a little bit more as opposed to like you go to the property and all we're learning is about the property. We can learn about
Yeah.
the property also later. And if it's so a good
Yeah.
meeting, we could just drive over there.
Yeah. Yeah. And the clues are almost unlimited and can be very, very small. So for instance, like, you said you walk up to this house and there's 4 cars in the driveway and a huge garage. But I'm looking for like of course, some of the obvious things like, well, what brand and age are those cars? But what's the bumper sticker on there? Is that a political bumper sticker? What might I learn from that? When
Mm.
I go inside, if they offer coffee, like, are they serving me Folgers or some kind of like quick instant thing? Or if they're like, here, let me go pull you a shot from my $10,000 espresso machine. Am I sitting on a couch that feels like it has springs that are 40 years old? Or is this a place that just sort of looks like it came right out of a
Magazine.
design
Yeah.
magazine? Like, how does it smell? Like, oh, you just baked cookies. Why it smells like cookies in here? Oh yeah, we've got grandkids coming over. Oh, tell me about the grandkids. Like, the off ramps can be triggered by even the tiniest little things. The
Because I
sports
think,
cap that's on the hanging on the wall by the front door. Like, now you can talk about that team, whatever.
because what's interesting about this approach, absentee owners are the hardest ones to take property from, to transact property. Or take is probably the wrong word. But there's a certain amount of like, I don't really have to sell this to you, Jeff.
Right.
But why?
Yeah.
Oh, because we're
Absolutely.
such good friends. And I'll entertain your offer only because we're such good friends, Jeff. As opposed
Yeah.
to, I don't know you. Why would I sell you this property? It makes me money. It's paid off. What do you want? Why are we
Yeah.
even standing around this property? I don't even really want to sell it. As
Yeah.
opposed to you, oh, the kids are coming over. You told me last week when we talked, the kids are coming. How was that? And da da da. And oh, the baseball game. And that's, I think, the secret underneath this thing is that absentee owners, if you've been in the business for any amount of time, they're very difficult to get their property from them, especially it's kind of like apartment blocks, like in the biggest multifamily apartment blocks owned by owner occupied in an A-class neighborhood. The mom and pop, a multifamily apartment owner does not need to sell. They're good. Why would they sell? Because Jeff's such a nice guy. They considered his offer because they like him, because he did the work to find out that he could be liked by them. And so definitely I can see why your conversion ratio in that against someone like me, because here's my approach. I'm going to go and probably see it. I'm probably going to talk about it on the phone. The first couple of things I'm going to talk about are probably like, do you have a pro forma and stuff? I'm going to talk to them like a landlord. And then I'm going to go and walk around the property and it's going to be whatever. And we're going to get into half the units. And it's kind of a waste of our time. Um, because I don't even know if I can buy it yet. And then the guy's gonna want to like leave pretty much right after. He's like, "You saw the house, you could go and tell me what you think it's worth. I gotta go." And the guy
Mhm.
leaves, and you're like, "Well, probably not gonna be able to do a deal with that guy." So,
Yeah.
what else? You go to their house, you uh take the off ramp. What was the
Mhm.
first one? I'm blanking, but be like them.
Yeah. Yeah. Position yourself as a peer. Um, but I think part of it has to do with agenda for a meeting or lack thereof. So my goal is to learn as much about my audience as possible. I
Mhm.
don't have any expectation that I'm going to leave that first meeting at their house or yeah, usually at their house, with enough information necessarily to know what to propose. I might, and it's nice when that happens. But I also realize this might be the beginning of a conversation where I might be sitting on this couch 7 times over the next 2 years. Or I
Yeah,
might leave the very first time and
do you think that that approach came from, because the one thing about absentee landlords or owners is they probably have a few, because
Mhm.
they're
Yeah.
usually portfolio players.
Mhm.
And then that approach is conducive to, I don't want to buy this house. Like, this isn't even the one I'm interested in. After we talked for
Right.
a bit, I'm actually interested in the one on the west side. And we should
Yeah.
talk more about that, because that one, while it's nice, is not really even for me. But you wouldn't have found that out if you would have just went down that road,
Mhm.
instead of having the open-ended conversation about, like, what do you own and why do you own it and what do you think of the economy and what else is going on with you, and
Mhm.
all the other things at their house. And so, yeah, that's interesting, because those vacant owners again are going to be possible double, triple sales. Because a lot of times, like, I'm in the single family business, and while it's nice to be relationship oriented and stuff like that, it ends up really being transactional. Like, I buy this one house from this one person, and I never talk to them again, because they're not a portfolio player. I'm not going to know much about them really, so it's like a very transactional. Whereas
Yeah.
your approach is like, what else do you own, maybe?
Yeah.
So
Yep, absolutely.
what we'll cap it here, because I think people need to like reach out to you and really like dive into this further. So we're gonna go to that in a second. But give me like some advice for someone who's just starting out and they said, well, I got inspired by this episode, I want to get started in real estate.
Mhm.
What's some advice you give to someone who's just getting started?
Yeah. I think the most advice that I tend to give people is to get comfortable. Well, maybe it's get comfortable with the idea of being uncomfortable, but get comfortable with the idea that you can reach out directly to someone who owns a piece of property and express interest. And that when you sit down with them, you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to come across like you're something that you're not. You don't have to sound like you've been in the business for 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to be able to produce a bank statement that has a whole bunch of money. That there's a lot of value in being having a real human conversation with somebody else,
Mm-hmm.
being very open, relating on the level of the human condition, right? Because this, if the seller you're talking to is net worth of 15 million and they've got 20 properties that you'd like to buy and you're just getting started, maybe you feel like you can't relate to them, maybe you feel inferior, but I'll tell you one thing is for sure, that other person knows what it's like to feel scared. They know what it's like to grieve. They know what it's like to wonder what they should decisions that they should be making. And if we realize that anybody can relate to that, then we can increase our confidence level a little bit. Because what I see with my clients too is, the first few seller meetings, they feel very like, I can't screw this up. I have to go through the bullet points, but I have to make it look like I'm not going through the bullet points. I've got one shot and then I'm out. And it feels very, very, very high pressure. And I
Mm-hmm.
would say, you know what? Take the pressure off yourself. Go sit down, be yourself, ask the questions that come to your mind. Go in prepared with some questions you'd like to know the answers to.
Mm-hmm.
But when somebody I think if we're too focused on following a script or even following a framework too closely and literally, we can really miss some obvious things, right? I just think if you're really really focused on going through a very specific list, and the seller says something like, "Oh, well, sorry I didn't get back to you last week because my grandson cut his leg off." Oh, okay. And how many bedrooms are there? You don't want to do that if
Oh,
you're
I'm
so
sorry
focused
to
on
hear that.
yeah, you're not
You jump
relating
to the next
like a
line.
human. And so I think we have to let go of sort of the pressure of saying, I have to collect all this information and immediately know what my offer is going to be. Like, just to have a real human conversation with people, which is ironically, I know I'm sounding like an old man when I say this, but an increasingly rare skill,
Mm-hmm.
an increasingly rare tendency actually for people in a more and more technology age where you just want to like text somebody.
Well, and it
This
feeds
ability
you
to do it.
only what you care about. And
Yeah.
so, what's challenging for a lot of people, myself included, I'm 40, so I'm like I'm at the beginning of the end of the kind of I remember what it's like to have no technology, right?
Yeah.
But when you look at the social feed, it only gives you what you're interested in. And the second you're not interested, you're like, not next, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
But there was a time in history I can remember where there was just whatever was in front of you. And it better be interesting because that's the most interesting thing happening, which is whatever is happening in front of you. And you don't really have that option to uncomfortably exit to your phone like we do today.
Mhm.
And so I actually spent about it might have been almost 6 or 8 months last year. I went to a flip phone. I got rid of my smartphone and I went back to a flip phone. And you know what it did? It forced me to stop texting people and call people and talk to them on the phone
Yeah.
like a person. And
Yeah.
so two things I picked up just recently on another podcast. This one guy said, it's better to be interested than interesting. And I was like, that really hits at the core of kind of what you're talking about is if
Yeah.
you go in there talking about yourself, you might spend an hour and learn nothing. And some people, and this is how I usually help people that are younger than myself stay focused, and even myself. It's just like if you're finding yourself like relatively disinterested because your dopamine level is lowering because you're not scrolling on your phone, ask questions to build the picture. You know, if someone says like, I bought a boat last year, you say, what kind? What color? How big is it? What does it look like? Where do you take it? And fill that in your mind. And the person telling you about what they love will certainly help you with that. And it'll really help you focus
Yeah.
on staying present by just trying to make a picture of this boat in your head. Oh, it's blue. It's a sailboat. It's 30 feet long. And yeah, it's, needs paint. Now we both are on the same page because I was
Yeah.
curious and interested enough to stay focused, but it's
Yeah.
very hard. It's very hard. And you're right. I think it is becoming a commodity. So what do you do? Let's end it on that question. What do you do with your students to keep them focused and present?
Well, what we talk about is solving the person. And so I think that the thing that helps them stay focused is that what they know is they're looking for the key insights to figure out kind of what makes this person in this situation tick, to understand their worldview. And you can't do like there's not really a worksheet that works super well for that. It's more about you have to listen in order to know what the next best follow-up question is, or to even notice a little tiny clue, a little tiny something that somebody says that gives you a sense on which way they lean sort of politically or this or that. And off ramps, I'd say I keep them very focused on off ramps because off ramps are everywhere. Like your boat example just now, I love it, and it's an example of an off ramp. I mean, if
Mm-hmm.
somebody said that
Nothing
to
to
me,
do
I'd
with
say
the
you
house.
got a
Yeah.
30-foot boat. Is it here? Can you can I see it?
Yeah,
Let's go
it'd
show me
be
the boat, right?
interested than interesting. Because
Yeah,
most people will say something like this. I once bought a boat, and let me tell you about my boat so that we can
yeah,
relate about boats. That
yeah,
guy doesn't care about your boat
right,
experience. He does not care. That they don't care. They only care, and this is how to win friends and influence people. People,
right.
unfortunately, really only care about only really what they care about.
Yeah,
So to try
yeah,
to get people interested in that they didn't ask you about your boat, they're not interested. If they open and say, "What about you? You ever bought a boat?" Now you can talk
hmm
about your boat. But if
yeah,
your first reaction to everything people say is one time I did that too, you're gonna have a hard time. You're gonna have
yeah,
a hard time out there.
yeah,
All right. So how do
yeah.
people find out more? How do they connect with you? What should they do? How do they find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have right here, you can see it on my screen. If you go to rentalwealthguide.com, there's a free PDF there, and it's called the step-by-step guide to buying your first or next rental property without relying on a bank to approve you for a loan. So this is a pretty darn detailed step-by-step summary of how we integrate. I would say this is integrating left brain and right brain skills to be able to find people who are a great prospect for selling you their properties with seller financing or vendor takebacks, and And then the relationship side of how would you even approach them? What would you say? What would you not say? What do you do throughout this process? Ultimately, how do you make the proposal? And so it brings sort of a technical side and a relational side into it. And so anyway, that's a great resource. And the other thing is I'm on Facebook a lot, arguably too much. So you can look for me, Jeff Stevens, Stephens on Facebook. We have a free group called Rental Portfolio Wealth Builders, which is a great place to connect with me too.
Awesome. Awesome. No Instagram, just Facebook.
There is an Instagram page, but I have not been consistent enough with it.
You gotta connect with the youth of tomorrow on Instagram.
Yeah.
And it seems to be a lot of investors are using it as business cards now. Instead of having one, you just say at me, and it's got the QR code. So very cool. Check them out on Facebook, download the guide. Very unique approach. And I think if you're listening and you really digested what we talked about here today, you're going to make a lot of money. But if you just skim this thing and you maybe weren't paying attention, listen again, because Jeff here put on a little bit of a masterclass for us. Jeff, I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
No problem. Until next time, guys, we'll catch you on the next episode.
Hey there, I really hope you enjoyed that episode. And as always, if you want to listen to more daily interview content, make sure you subscribe. And if you're an active real estate investor and you're doing deals and you'd like to get featured on this show, then just head over to daveinterviewyou.com. Now at moneypartnerformula.com, we help real estate investors to create a process for predictably getting capital so they can do more deals without relying on hard money lenders or the banks. We do this by building them a private capital marketing system. Now, if you want help turning yourself into a big money capital attraction machine, then book a call with our team to see how we can help. Just visit moneypartnerformula.com to find out more. All right, take care, and we'll see you on the next interview.